What is up, basketball fans? Welcome to the NBA Outlet. I'm your host, Nick Fay. With me, as always, Kory, Waldron, and special guest today, Gerald Bourguet, Fanside NBA editor and writer. Guys, what's up?
Not much. How about you?
Welcome to the pod, Gerald. Excited to talk Phoenix Suns with somebody who probably knows a lot more than I do.
Yeah, excited to get Gerald on for the first time. Give us some in-depth coverage of the Suns as we continue our preview series. Quick reminder before we get started, though, you can find us on iTunes, Blog Talk Radio, OTGBasketball.com, Google Play, and YouTube. Also head to DesignTree/OffTheGlass. OTG5 will save you $5 on any merchandise order. But let's dive into the Suns. Before we talk next season, we'll talk last year. Suns 19-63, last in the West. What emoji would you use to describe last season, Gerald?
I don't want to be generic and just say poop outright. I mean, I feel like it's either that or like vomit or like the angry guy cursing. It's one of those three emojis, maybe just straight tears. I'm going to say vomit just because the poop's a little too generic, but like it was just brutal to watch other than opening night, and opening night kind of like hurt because it came back as like, it gave us false hope here in Phoenix, you know, and then just straight back to earth. I think the very next game they got shellacked by the Nuggets in Denver. So just the whole year was a struggle. So I'm going to say vomit.
I went with the annoyed face because it just felt like another year where going into the year I had elevated expectations for the Phoenix Suns, not necessarily being a playoff team. But there was definitely a different buzz around the Suns going into last year about them maybe being more competitive, and we just really didn't get that. And I'm still a person who's really – it's hard for me to gauge what Devin Booker is, which we'll talk about probably more in depth on this pod. But once again, I was just watching him put up numbers which felt a lot of the time just empty. So for me, it was the annoyed face.
Yeah, third year doing the series, and I want to say that's the first time anybody's used a vomit or poop emoji, so shout out to Gerald for that. I'm going to go with the repeat cycle, and it just feels like the Suns have been stuck in this cycle where they've just been at the bottom of the West every year getting a high draft pick, and they haven't been able to kind of get out of that the last 3 or 4 seasons. But on a positive note, what was the biggest positive takeaway from last season?
I would probably start with Devin Booker's playmaking. You know, a lot of people didn't know how to feel about Booker's game based on his first 2 to 3 seasons. And that's still kind of the case because his teams have never won at least 30 games in a season. But, you know, he made a real step forward in the playmaking department. It wasn't just scoring. He was also carrying the offense from a playmaking perspective, 6.8 assists per game. And the Suns didn't really have a point guard. They haven't really had a point guard since Eric Bledsoe, at least the starting caliber one. You know, they were shuffling between Isaiah Cannon, 2 second-round rookies. They brought in Tyler Johnson, who's more of a combo guard. But for the most part, Devin Booker was like the de facto point guard. So I think that was probably the biggest positive because outside of Devin Booker, there aren't many positives here in Phoenix, at least last year.
Yeah, I think the positive would be that Devin Booker continues to show that his game's evolving further. You know, obviously we've seen him put up some big time scoring numbers. He's been asked to do a lot of different things, which maybe isn't his ideal role going forward, but the fact that he's had to have some, as Gerald mentioned, playmaking duties at an elevated level, I think can only help him in the long run. The biggest positive is Devin Booker.
Yeah, obviously, D-Book took his game to another level. He picked up on the playmaking. Just a quick shout-out. I really like Kelly Oubre after he was traded to Phoenix. I think he showed some really nice things. And Mikal Bridges, I thought, had some really nice moments as a rookie, too. But biggest negative takeaways for Phoenix last year?
I mean,
I heard that laugh.
I mean, I don't want this podcast to be 3 hours long, but I mean, it's pretty much everything else. Like, Mikal Bridges was terrific defensively, would kind of disappear offensively. Ayton was he had a historically good rookie season, but was overshadowed by 2 incredible rookies that were taken after him. You know, it was Oubre came in. He had a positive impact. As you mentioned, he was very good here in Phoenix, and a lot of people didn't quite realize it. He kind of impacted the culture on and off the court, but you know, obviously heading into the summer, there were questions about whether he'd be able to reach a long-term agreement, and they had to settle for a 2-year deal, which I liked for both sides, but obviously he's not necessarily a long-term fixture here because of the length of that contract. Last season, the point guard position was just a nightmare. As I had mentioned before, Devin Booker was pretty much their best point guard, and he's a shooting guard. The growth in his playmaking is great, but he's never going to be, that James Harden who needs to run the point. It should be more as like a secondary playmaker. And then the 4 spot, they had a giant gaping hole at power forward that Dragon Bender was actually their most effective player at the last year. They won 19 games, I think it was, second worst record in the league. Horrible point differential, horrible offensive defensive rating. Devin Booker's defense made a step at the beginning of the year, and then as the season wore on and it became less imperative for everyone to care, I guess, it fell off again. So really there were a lot of negatives for this.
From the negative side, as you mentioned, there's a lot of you can pick from. I think Dragon Bender failing further was definitely a negative. Josh Jackson with the off the court issues and the fact that he just couldn't get it going. And also, I wasn't a huge fan of even though Tyler Johnson expiring, I believe, the end of this season. And I understand the thought of getting Tyler Johnson was to hopefully he could fill the point guard hole. He wasn't able to really do that. Struggled in his 12 games. I think he played 12 or 13 games with the Phoenix Suns last season. And now, obviously, it's just 1 year, but those would be my 3 negatives.
Yeah, I think you guys pretty much covered it. Everywhere from the point guard play to Jackson Bender, just a lot of things just didn't really go well. And obviously, that's what happens when you win 19 games. But getting over to the OTG Power Rankings via our staff, they have the Suns coming in at number 27. Do you guys think this is fair, too high, too low? Thoughts on it?
Number 27. I think that's probably just about right. There's hope in Phoenix that now that the Suns added some actual NBA players, who I'm sure we'll talk about coming up, that they can take a step forward. They're not going to be a playoff team. That would take a massive leap. But there is hope that they'll, finally cross that 30-win threshold, take steps in the right direction, show Devin Booker, like, hey, we're trying. Like, we're going to put an actual team around you. We got actual NBA veterans. So hopefully it winds up being too low, but I mean, heading into the season, that sounds pretty much just about right.
Yeah, I think it's just about right for where they were last year. I think Ricky Rubio will help them for sure. We'll talk about him in a second, I'm sure. But I think 27 is fair with some upside to go a few spots higher.
Yeah, I think going to the year 27 is fair, but like you guys said, upside is there, but a lot of young talent on the roster possibly taking a new jump. And well, this perfect transition, new head coach Monty Williams. What are your thoughts on him taking over and this being the 3rd or 4th new head coach in the last 3 seasons?
Yeah, I mean, the head coaching position for the Phoenix Suns is basically like the defense against the dark arts position at Hogwarts. Like, it changes every single year. I think this is Devin Booker's 5th coach heading into his 5th season, so not great. But I do like Monty Williams. I think I liked Igor Kokoskov last year as well. He was actually pretty brilliant with some of the offensive sets that he came up with, but it seemed like he and his players weren't on the same page. And I don't know if it was a cultural gap or just, an assistant coach trying to become a head coach. I don't know if the problems with some of the Suns youngsters and how much youth they have in that locker room, but they just didn't seem to click very well. And it looked like he had lost his team in the second half of the season pretty much. So Monty Williams is a well-known and well-respected guy around the league. He's known as being a player's coach. And I think he's going to be more stern with this group, but still able to reach them. So I'm optimistic about what he's going to be able to do with such a young collection of talent. And again, adding some established veterans who aren't already over the hill. No offense to Tyson Chandler and Jared Dudley, but that will definitely help him, have a better grip on the locker room.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the head coaching changes aren't great, especially trying to set some sort of culture. You don't like to have this much turnover. The one good thing is Monty Williams is a guy who's almost universally liked and loved by NBA players, so that's definitely a benefit for the locker room. I don't think it's a bad fit. I just want to see them stick with a head coach for longer than a few months to a year. So that's like the biggest thing is, can Monty Williams get enough time to really put in his system, and to try to get this Phoenix Suns team moving furthermore in the right direction.
Yeah, like you guys said, Monty Williams is a guy who's really well liked. Hopefully the players can pick up on him. He seems to be well liked by guys around the league. It's about kind of, the players buying in, but also he's going to have a decent amount of actual NBA players in this roster, where probably coaches in the past for the Suns have had to coach guys that just aren't NBA players. So that should benefit Monty Williams going to the season. But talking draft picks, Cameron Johnson at 11th and Ty Jerome at 24th. Thoughts on these two, Gerald?
You know what? You look at every move that James Jones made over the summer, and you can see common themes. He was targeting shooting. He was targeting maturity. Even though these guys are obviously NBA rookies, they're both 3 or 4 year college players. They're older guys. Cam Johnson is already one of the oldest players on the roster, unfortunately.
Damn.
I like the additions. I wasn't crazy about the way they went about adding those players. And that was a common theme for the entire summer as well. You look at what they did on draft night. They dumped TJ Warren for virtually nothing but cap space, and then filled that cap space with Aaron Baines and Dario Saric. They plugged in the 4 spot with Saric, and then Baines is going to be a very good backup for Ayton. But, they filled up all the cap space that they had created with the Warren dump, and then they had to go and dump Josh Jackson to be able to sign a point guard, and they had to include DeAnthony Melton to do that. So all these draft day moves that they were making and subsequent trades were kind of fitting that weird philosophy of, okay, we like the end result, but the means to getting there was not ideal. Same thing with draft night. When they traded down from 6 to 11, I was like, okay, Brandon Clark will still probably be there, who next to Ayton is kind of an ideal fit if he can figure out his jump shot, because he's a defensive shot blocking presence inside, which is exactly what Ayton needs, because he's not much of a rim protector at this stage. So that would have been perfect. He was there at number 11. And then they make the biggest reach in the draft by taking Cam Johnson like 10 spots ahead of where most people had him going. So that was kind of unfortunate. I like the shooting that he'll bring, but right now I'm not sure what else he provides. Ty Jerome, I like that addition. Obviously having a more stable backup point guard option will be good if Elio Kobo doesn't, make strides in this second year. But again, it was just, a lot of people here were upset about trading down from 6 to 11, Brandon Clark being there, and then going with one of the older guys in the draft who would have been there, 5 to 10 spots later.
Yeah, my biggest takeaway from the draft was easily the reach. I don't know a ton about a lot of these prospects. I don't watch a ton of college basketball, but I know that on NBA Twitter during draft night, that was the biggest gripe for most Phoenix Sun fans.
Yeah, our draft guys kind of went crazy when they did that, because even if they just traded down 5 spots and took him 5 to 7 spots too high, that's okay. But really taking him at 11, it's just like, okay, guys, that's a real reach for a team that's not going to be contending anytime soon, or even contending for a playoff spot this year. So it's just a weird decision. Like Gerald mentioned, just the means of getting there was just really strange with the whole TJ Warren trade, then picking up Aaron Baines. It was just that whole situation. It was like the Suns really didn't know what they wanted to do, and they just were like, oh, this looks nice, let's make this move. So, but getting 2 free agency signings and trades, they brought in Ricky Rubio, Dario Saric, Frank Kaminsky, Cheick Diallo, Aaron Baines, Javon Carter. What was your favorite move, Gerald?
My favorite move was probably the Ricky Rubio signing. And it's funny because that is a lot of people on the outside's their most criticized move of the offseason. Saying that they overpaid for Rubio, that he's, not much of a difference maker, that it's just a bad fit with Devin Booker. I get the complaints, but Rubio's annual salary is around average for an NBA player, and Rubio is at least a league average point guard. The Suns were playing Isaiah Cannon and 2 second-round rookies at point guard last year. This is a huge upgrade, and I'm not sure why people on the outside were expecting them to just stand pat and be okay with their point guard situation, and then they go out and get an actual point guard, and that's criticized too. I get that the Suns don't deserve any benefit of the doubt on the outside, but Rubio is a useful addition. Last year, throwing entry passes to DeAndre Ayton was a struggle. Just even the ball in the block was a struggle. So Rubio's going to be able to do that. He's not great in the pick and roll if you look at the advanced numbers, but he is good at driving and dumping it off, which is where Ayton's going to feed. And he already fed last year without a real point guard. So this is going to be big for him. It's going to take a lot of pressure off Booker to handle both scoring and playmaking. Hopefully they'll be able to get him moving off the ball a little bit more, because heading into the draft, if everyone remembers, he was known as a knockdown Klay Thompson spot-up shooting type, and now his game has really evolved, but it'd be nice to get him more spot-up looks moving forward. I think Rubio's going to help with that. He played really well for Spain in this FIBA tournament, and hopefully he's going to carry that momentum, that confidence forward. But I really like that move, and honestly, like, even if the Suns did slightly overpay for Rubio, they have to. They're in that position. They're not going to get anybody otherwise. You have to kind of pay up a little bit, and hopefully they learn from the Trevor Ariza overpay. You know, the 1 year, $15 million deal where the guy is checked out by November because he's going to still get his money no matter what, and is traded by December. Like, they gave him a 3-year deal. They're paying him well, and you know, he's still only in his mid-20s. Like, he's not that old. So I really like that move. Contrary to how it looks from the outside.
So I love the Ricky Rubio move, but more so because I didn't want the Pacers signing him, and this ensured that the Pacers weren't going to sign Ricky Rubio. But also, to that point, I do like this signing because the Phoenix Suns, as we mentioned, their biggest issue has been having a playmaker who can run the offense, having a point guard, if you will, who can run the offense. And Ricky Rubio is that. Is the jump shot of concern? Yes. Is the defense a little shaky at times? Yes. But this is an above-average point guard who should fit well next to Devin Booker, who is looking to score. So I like the Ricky Rubio signing. I think it was the right move to make. And, I mean, the Frank the Tank signing, I mean, if the guy can find some sort of defensive ability, there is some hope there because he can't shoot the long ball. I think Aaron Baines from a defensive perspective is good, but no other signing really wows me.
Yeah, I think you look at the Rubio signing, and you're right. You know, they definitely overpaid a little bit, but in the position the Suns are at, they're not going to sign any other big names. And if they weren't going to be able to get D'Angelo Russell, it seemed like they weren't really that interested in. But I thought that would have been a great pairing with Devin Booker, not in the defensive end, but offensively, that would have been a lot of fun. But I think when you have these young players, especially so many young names, you need to have a veteran out there, especially at the point guard position, to make sure guys are in the right spots, setting them up and making their lives easier. So it should definitely help Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, and any other young guy on the roster, just having somebody that knows what they're doing and just, you know, alleviating some of the pressure that's out there. But I also really like the Dario Saric pickup, because I think he showed a lot of potential in Philadelphia. Then when he went to Minnesota, things just didn't work out quite as well. I think he could get some nice spotlight with Phoenix and have a real opportunity to be a nice 4 for them moving forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think if he even just shoots like a mediocre percentage, an average percentage from three-point range, he's really going to help open things up, even with a non-shooter like Rubio out there, because the Suns were dead last in three-point percentage last year. Like, they need even just average shooting would go a long way in making life easier for Booker, because when he has the ball in his hands, you look at the rest of the roster and there were virtually zero threats from out there. Hopefully Monty Williams lets Ayton try his hand at threes this year. Last year's coaching staff really didn't want him expanding his range. We'll see if Ayton even has that kind of range in his repertoire. But, you know, additions like Saric and even Baines to a lesser degree, those will help. And hopefully Bridges goes back closer to his college percentages, and Booker, you know, he had to shoot a lot off the pull-up dribble, a lot off the dribble in general. So hopefully his percentage bounces back this year as well.
And I think just having a lot more, you know, you mentioned Baines and we mentioned Saric and Rubio, it's just having more NBA level guys, more NBA vets that can just kind of point these younger players in the right direction. Sometimes it's a small thing. And even just having a guy like Aaron Baines who could set some good screens, open up some space for Devin Booker, I think will be huge. Now, talking about departures, Josh Jackson, DeAnthony Melton, Dragan Bender, TJ Warren, Jamal Crawford, Troy Daniels, Rashawn Holmes, and Jimmer Fredette. Out of these guys, who do you wish they were able to keep? You can say no one.
I mean, I would probably say DeAnthony Melton, honestly. Warren is probably the best player that was let go this summer, but he wasn't a good fit for this team. His best role would be as a six man on a contender. Like he comes in, he gives you microwave scoring, and that's about it. Like he's a black hole. He doesn't really pass very well, but he's a good off the ball cutter. He really made a massive leap in his 3-point shooting last year, which was very impressive. And it looked sustainable, actually. It didn't look like it was a fluke. Like he worked really hard on his 3-point shot over the summer heading into the season, but he just wasn't a good fit. Like he's not a good defender. He's best in that six-man role. But I would say DeAnthony Melton, just because I feel like they passed up on his potential way too soon. And as I mentioned, that TJ Warren dump, the salary that they wound up taking back in their other trades draft night meant they had to dump Josh Jackson, and in order to do so, they had to attach assets. And apparently 2 second-rounders was not enough. So they had to attach Melton, who's going to be a very good defender. I'm kind of excited to see what he's able to carve out for himself with that grit and grind culture in Memphis. But he had some playmaking flashes, and I think they gave up on him a little too soon. We don't know if they tried to attach a Kobo instead, but that's what I would have done rather than give him up. So that would probably be my answer.
I don't think they missed anybody too badly. I think TJ Warren's a guy they may miss to a degree because it felt like he was just sort of finding himself this past year. And as you mentioned, Gerald, they gave him up for next to nothing, and it ended up becoming an assortment of other moves along with it. But I think TJ Warren might be the one guy they missed just because offensively he could get a bucket.
Yeah, I think DeAnthony Melton is a good pick just because, being a young point guard, not necessarily having a point guard moving forward, and Rio could be hurt, and then you're depending on Okobo, who really I don't know. And I remember last year, around draft time, a lot of people were super high on him. What has happened with him, Gerald? Like, did he just not fit well in the NBA last year? It's just going to take a year or two for him to develop?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's pretty young, and he doesn't have a lot of experience in the NBA. And it didn't help that, obviously first-year head coach, new head coach, they're trying to win games. And he just didn't stand out as someone who could take over that point guard job or even the backup point guard job. His minutes were kind of sparing, and he didn't really do much while he was out there. So kind of more of a project that the Suns might not have time for, especially because now they have all these other point guard. Obviously, they have Rubio, who will be the starter, but on the backup front, they've got Tyler Johnson, who can fill that role. They've got the rookie Ty Jerome. They added Jalen LeCue, and then they got Javon Carter in the Josh Jackson trade. So there's a lot of questions heading into training camp about who's going to actually make the roster at all.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It'll be interesting to keep an eye on. Javon Carter actually was really pesky for Memphis last year too, so keep an eye on him. Biggest X factor though, team-wise, this can't be health or a specific player.
Yeah, I would probably go with Monty Williams, honestly. You look at all these new pieces, and obviously they added a lot of good veterans, established NBA players, which is something they haven't had a lot of over the last few years. But it's going to take someone to get everyone to buy in because these young guys have not had stability. They haven't had a system. They haven't had a coach that they can buy in with because if they aren't winning enough games, they're out the door in a couple of months. So I think Monty has a tremendous challenge ahead of him as far as establishing a new culture, establishing a system that works, getting people to buy in defensively, especially Booker and Ayton, who are the team's two stars, getting the young guys, learning how to nurture them, but also be strict with them because that's what they need. And then also integrating all of these new faces, all these new players. It's not going to be an easy challenge, and this franchise has been stuck in this kind of sense of malaise for almost 10 years now. So he's got a really big challenge ahead of him, and I think that is probably their biggest X factor outside of a specific player.
I kind of grouped all the young guys together and just said player development. Obviously, Devin Booker is still relatively young, entering his fifth year. Same with Kelly Oubre. DeAndre Ayton entering year 2. Can he add more to the defensive side of his game? Dario Saric, who struggled last year throughout most of the season. Bridges, who I thought had a very nice rookie year, but what can he expand on? So for me, it's player development. How do these young guys continue to develop?
Yeah, both great points. I think you look at player development, all the young players, and I think in terms of coaching, you're just looking for the Suns to play better basketball. Like Gerald mentioned earlier, like they had issues just throwing a pass into the post. Like it's just about doing some of the simple things and making the right basketball plays, and that's going to come from coaching and just development from the players. But who's going to be the starting lineup on opening night?
I would go with Rubio, Booker, Oubre, Saric, and Ayton.
Same for me.
Yeah, I think that's the most likely one. Gerald, could you see any possible changes with that, or do you think that's pretty much locked in?
I think it's pretty close to locked in, but I will say that Mikal Bridges could challenge for that 3 spot. He was extremely good defensively last year, and if he takes a step forward offensively this year, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the starter, some point a couple months from now. I don't see it for opening night, especially since they're paying Oubre $15 million a year now, but there is that possibility that he could win the job in training camp.
Gotcha. Who's the player to watch for this team? Who's a guy to keep an eye on, positive or negative?
I would probably say both Ayton and Bridges. I think Ayton, as I mentioned before, he had a historically good rookie season that was kind of overlooked just because Luka Doncic and Trae Young were that amazing. But he was historically efficient without an actual point guard. You throw Rubio in there, someone who can actually get him passes and give him even average NBA spacing, he's going to feast inside. And if he can make more strides defensively, he's going to start looking like a number 1 pick. And then for Bridges, I think this is going to be a big year for him. He was under the radar, like very good defensively, taking some pretty tough assignments as a rookie. But I think if he can get his 3-point shooting together and be more of a floor spacer and not, he kind of disappeared on offense for stretches. But if he doesn't do that this year, I think he could take a big step forward as well.
Yeah, for me, it's DeAndre Ayton. 16 and 10 his rookie season, 58% from the field. Just looking for the defense to come along. Obviously, being just 20, there's still a lot of potential and a lot of growing left to do for Ayton. But that's a guy I'm watching to see how he develops furthermore in his sophomore season.
Yeah, I like the Bridges pick, but I'm going with DeAndre Ayton as well. I think he's just that possibility of taking a major leap this year, having a real point guard, and then giving the Suns just another big building block. Having him and Devin Booker locked up as your possible 2 stars moving forward just puts the franchise in a lot better position than it's been in the last couple seasons. But what would be worst case scenario for next year?
Worst case scenario, you look at some of the Suns' best players over the last few years. Devin Booker's been banged up right when the team is trying to hit its stride. Tyler Johnson, same thing with him. Kelly Oubre, same thing last year. There was a stretch where they beat like the Warriors, the Bucks, the Lakers. They had a healthy Tyler Johnson and Kelly Oubre. They had like a starting 5, and it looked like an actual basketball team. And then guys started getting banged up. So I think worst case scenario, Booker deals with more injuries. Rubio's non-shooting is a problem for the offense. Bridges doesn't take that step forward with his shooting. Ayton doesn't really make a discernible leap, even though he has a new point guard. And then, the inevitable that everyone in Phoenix doesn't want to talk about, but is going to be on the table if they don't make a leap in 1 to 2 years. Booker gets upset and starts to want out. We've seen it so many times with superstars who have had much better teams. Another sub 30-win season, like he's going to get to that point pretty quickly.
What do you think? What are the chances of Devin Booker demanding a trade this year? Like if the Suns were to be like even worse than last year?
I don't think he has the leverage to demand a trade yet because, this is just year 1 of his 5-year max. Like he's locked in. The Suns have him for a long time. So I don't think it comes this year. But if they get off to another terrible start, like it's only reasonable to expect this guy to not have the best attitude about it. Like he is taking all of the blame for their struggles, even though he's been the only good thing they've had for the last 4 or 5 years now. Like he is constantly questioned about how good he actually is, picked apart for his defense, and rightfully so. For the Suns to take that next step, he has to be better defensively. But you don't want to be known as a good stats, bad team player, and that's what he is right now until the win-loss column says otherwise. So I don't think it happens this year, but man, if they get off to a bad start or if injuries kick in, it'll be interesting to see what his mental disposition looks like.
Yeah, it's got to be frustrating for him, especially as he continues to improve. But Kory, what's worst case for you?
They remain the same. They're in the bottom of the Western Conference. We just don't see a lot of player development growth. And once again, we're looking and wondering when the Suns team is finally going to get out of its own way.
Yeah, I got the same thing as you. As I used the repeat emoji to start the show, would be the worst case scenario here if they just continue to repeat the cycle they've had the last few seasons, which hasn't been great. But what's best case scenario for the Suns?
I think Booker finally has a fully healthy season and everything clicks chemistry wise. Like I think it would involve Rubio taking that playmaking load off Booker's shoulders to do everything, making his life easier by setting him up for more spot up looks. His 3-point percentage looks more like the shooter that he was, his reputation was given to him heading into the draft. Ayton takes a leap with a real point guard. Bridges' 3-ball comes back. The vets all fill their roles. Baines helps toughen Ayton up as his kind of mentor behind him. And I think the Suns win, 35, 40 games. That would be best case. I'm talking like ideal case. But yeah, 35 to 40 would be the best case scenario.
Yeah, best case scenario would be they're just competitive. You struggle playing against them on a nightly basis. Guys like Devin Booker are healthy. He's finally finding his rhythm. DeAndre Ayton's finding his rhythm. These young guys are starting to pop, and we see the Suns maybe a year or two away from actually being playoff contenders.
Yeah, you guys are spot on here. I think you're looking at somewhere between the 32 to 35 win range. Being competitive in the West is just a win for the Suns in general with all the tough teams you're going to face out there. And you just want to see guys develop and, like I mentioned, play a better style of basketball and just progress in the right ways. Like a competitive team you've seen like in the past in Brooklyn, who they weren't necessarily ready to make the playoffs, but you saw the signs that they were becoming a playoff team. Actual predictions for the Suns next year, and where do they finish in the division?
I've got them finishing 4th in the division. I mean, it's a freaking brutal division. You look at it now. They got the Clippers, the Lakers, the Warriors, and the Kings, who made the kind of leap last year that the Suns are hoping to make this year. But I've got them 4th in the division. I think they'll be like 13th in the West and probably win 31 games is what I'm setting it at.
My actual prediction is them winning 27 games and being last in the division. Shocker. But I think they're going to be definitely more competitive. I have some good feeling about this team going into this upcoming year.
Yeah, I'm in between you guys. I got 28 wins, last in the division, but I do think they'll be more competitive like we talked about on this preview. There's just a lot more competence on the roster from the players to the development to hopefully Monty Williams be able to put a system and getting the players on board. But any topics or storylines you guys want to cover before we talk League Pass?
I think the last thing that I would say is that it's just tough because if you look at the rest of the West, as we've mentioned, like it's going to be brutal to get to 30 wins, and that doesn't sound like improvement, but it really would be. Like they won 19 games last year, that'd be an 11-win improvement just to get to 30. It's just a tough time for the Suns to be at this stage, especially with Devin Booker's patience. Like it's not ideal, and they're going to have to shock some people in order for this rebuild to finally, like it feels like it's been treading in place, as you mentioned, the repeat cycle. They really need to get some traction this year, even if it's around 30 wins.
Yeah, I said it midpoint last year on one of our pods about Karl-Anthony Towns and the clock starting to tick for the Timberwolves in regards to him probably wanting out of Minnesota. And I feel like we're right around that point with the Phoenix Suns, where there just has to be some sort of progression, some sort of improvement on the roster around him for Devin Booker to say, I'm not wasting away here in Phoenix. So that's probably my biggest emphasis for this year is the Suns to start pleasing Devin Booker in the way of showing him wins rather than dollar signs.
Yeah, and I think some of that's on the court, but I also think some of that's off the court. You know, the Suns' organization and culture hasn't been viewed in a positive light. I think they need to work to change that and make some correct decisions. A lot of pressure on James Jones, but where would you guys rank this team on League Pass 1 through 10?
I mean, I have to watch them, but I would say probably a 4 or 5 for me. I mean, obviously there are so many interesting teams in the league, and now that it's wide open, everybody's going to be staking their claim this year. last year the Suns were like a -2 on the league pass scale. So I would take a 4 or 5 this year, honestly.
I'm going with a 3. I think Devin Booker accounts for 2 of the 3, and then the young guys can all come together for the 1 to make the 3. But yeah, they're probably going to be on the lower end of the scale.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a 4 here. They could fluctuate to a 5, or they could drop down to a 3 depending on the steps they take. I think DeAndre Ayton has a little bit of pop to his game too that makes him interesting. But what TV show would you compare to the Suns? Now, this can be based off a plot, or it can be based off of just watchability for you.
I thought long and hard about this, and it was a show that I used to love, and it's one that has completely fallen off the map. So sounds pretty fitting for the Suns. But The Walking Dead, like,
Ooh.
I honestly had a feeling that was the show you were going to pick, because I know I've seen like talk to Kory about it. I have never watched The Walking Dead, but he said it started really good, and then the last couple seasons haven't been great.
yes, like people forget this, but there was a time back in the day when AMC like ruled TV with Walking Dead and Breaking Bad. Like, The Walking Dead was a legitimately good show, and it fell on hard times, and people stopped watching and stopped caring. So it applies to the Suns in that way, and also because this has been a zombie franchise for the last 5 to 10 years. Like, they haven't been relevant, they haven't been good. They've been the laughing stock. They've had an owner who had a goat crap in his offense. Like, it's just a joke at this point. The ratings are falling off. Like, The Walking Dead feels like the best comparison for me.
Yeah, I went with Lilyhammer. It's a Netflix original show. If you don't know it, it's not a shocker. I had 3 seasons.
I never heard of it.
It was canceled after season 3. The main character is Steven Van Zandt. He played Silvio Dante in The Sopranos. So in comparison, they have Devin Booker and no one else on this show. So you're watching for the one guy, and eventually after 3 years, they just ran out of storyline and content, so it got canned. So that's my show pick.
Yeah, and I said I was going to do better with the TV show comparisons, but I haven't stepped up. I'm just going with Dexter here because this is a show that I really like to start off, and I think there's things that you really like about the Suns, but then when you look deeper, it just things aren't that great. And then that's kind of how Dexter went. Just a whole bunch of things kept going wrong in the show, and he kept getting out of it, where it's like, okay, you can only have so much good luck. But obviously the Suns don't have much of that. But Gerald, great having you on the show for the first time. Give yourself a plug where the people can find you on Twitter and find your work.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on Twitter at GeraldBourguet, and you can find my work on the NBA section of fansided.com for the step back.
Kory, what you got?
Sweet. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KWalHoops, KWAL Hoops.
And obviously, you can follow the brand on Twitter at OTG Basketball. You can find the website, otgbasketball.com. We're running a couple different series right now. And you can obviously find the show on iTunes, Block Talk Radio, otgbasketball.com, Google Play, and YouTube. Big thanks to Gerald and Kory, and thank everybody for listening.
Peace out, knuckleheads.